I simply want to take a moment to introduce to you today our guest. Last week, did you enjoy our guest? Yes. It was fantastic. For those of you who were watching online at home, and I'm talking to those of you out there now, you may have enjoyed Ken Huff, but Ken Huff wasn't here live. Ken Huff was a service he did a few years back because we could not live stream our guest last week simply because he could be kicked out of the country or put in prison for being there as a missionary and sharing the gospel. So that's why we did that. But today you get to watch it live, so you're going to enjoy this one. Last year we had a Chi Alpha director for the state of Oregon, but he also worked at the other university in Oregon State, right? I'm a Ducks fan, right? So we couldn't have the director at Oregon State University without finding a moment and a way to bring in the director from the University of Oregon, who, by the way, won last night over Ohio State. Yes, I said that. Having a microphone does have privileges, I'm sorry. I love you all anyway, whether you're an Oregon State fan or if you're a Husky fan, that's a whole other conversation, but we have to draw the line somewhere, right? Right. Okay, praise God. So today it's really my privilege to bring to our church and to invite to share what God is doing on the campus of University of Oregon, the amazing things. And so would you give a really warm welcome to our guest today, Joey Kelly from University of Oregon?
Yeah, I'll try not to gloat too much this morning after last night. Just as a show of hands, I always want to know who I'm speaking to. How many Duck fans do we have in here? Let's go loud and proud. A few loud and proud. How many Beaver fans do we have in here? There you go. I love it. To all my Beaver friends in here, even more reason to send a missionary to University of Oregon, right? Because those Ducks are just lost, right? Before I came down here a few years ago, I did Chi Alpha at a community college. And, the question there wasn't, who you're rooting for or whatever. The question was just simply do you know your school mascot? And it was 50-50 split of whether or not people even knew that they were the Orcas. But it's good to be here this morning with you. And so I'm just really excited to be here. This church has, even before I even met Pastor Kevin, has been supporting our family. And as you were just kind of giving the pitch for Missions Month, I was thinking in my head of I don't know about if you know this, but it can take anywhere from 20 to 50 to 100, a few hundred churches and individuals to send one missionary or one family. And so it takes many to enable us to do what we do. And so I'm just so profoundly grateful for this community. And we'll see if I get invited back, after this morning. In Jesus' famous last words, I think it got mentioned just a moment ago, he says, "All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you, and surely I'm with you always to the very end of the age." And even though I grew up in the church, it wasn't until college where I first heard this and was introduced to Jesus' call to all of his followers to make disciples, who make disciples, who make disciples, you can continue on. My first year in college was quite difficult. I struggled to make friends, experienced isolation and loneliness, became depressed, tried to find ways to treat that through things like pornography, but that just meant more loneliness, more depression, and just over and over again, this cycle went. Somehow I gritted my way through that first year of school, but I wasn't really down to repeat it again, and so I transferred schools to a school in Bellingham, Washington, named Western Washington University. They had about that much school pride, not like the Ducks. But little did I know that I was walking into a ministry that now has a legacy of over 50 years of making disciples who make disciples who make disciples. I had been on campus for one day when I ran into this 6'3", short hair, red-headed guy named Ryan. Ryan introduced himself, and he told me that he was a small group leader for a group called Chi Alpha, which is a ministry that sounds like a frat that's not a frat, which I have to tell students all the time. We became quick friends through playing basketball, but we became deep friends through this making disciples who make disciples who make disciples, this thing that Jesus calls discipleship. He would invite me to their weekly small group meeting that met just a few floors below me in the same dorm. And I would meet a couple of other guys who were also interested in pursuing Jesus together. And he would also take time out of his week to meet me one-on-one every week, to study the Bible together, to grow in our friendship together, and to talk about the joys and the hardship of being a college student. And that's when I first tasted discipleship, and it changed me. I would continue on as a small group leader for a few years, and when the time came to decide on whether I was going to use my degree as a business person in the marketplace, I instead actually opted for Chi Alpha. Because the vision for making disciples who make disciples had been so ingrained in me that I got excited about the idea of multiplying myself and sending way more Joeys into the marketplace to make disciples who make disciples who make disciples. And so Chi Alpha has been my calling ever since I graduated in 2012. I met my wife in Chi Alpha. We got married shortly thereafter, which is a bonus, meeting your spouse in Chi Alpha. Woohoo. And we spent 8 years, like I said before, doing Chi Alpha at a community college before we sensed Jesus invited us to the University of Oregon just a few years ago. And so before we get into some things, I want to do a few, this is a duck pun, introductions of some people that are important to me. So on the left, unfortunately, my family couldn't join us this morning, but my wife, Davielle, our oldest is Chloa, she's 6. There was a lot of 6-year-olds in the kids' class this morning, which was pretty fun. Marcus, 4, and Addie, who will turn 2 in December. And they all love seeing duck memorabilia everywhere. They thought when we first moved here, they just thought it was like crazy that they would keep seeing the Oregon O all over the place. And I was like, well, yeah, we live here now. You're going to see it everywhere. On the right is the wonderful team in which I get to work with. Brandon, who's joined me here this morning. He's the one that looks closest to a student, but is not actually a student. So he's young enough to get away with, covertly being a student on campus. But John, and then Karen. Karen specifically reaches international students on our campus. And so I work with a wonderful team. And then I recently, actually, fun fact, one of our Chi Alpha students is the duck. That's probably something I can't say his name on camera, otherwise, I'll get sought out or something. But one of our students is the duck, so he snuck up and said hi to us at our table. But the gal on the right is our first small group leader, which we're really excited about. Beginning the journey and the process of making disciples who make disciples who make disciples. And so we're really excited about her and praying for more small group leaders this next year. So these are the people that I get to spend 95% of my life with. And so there you go. Well, before we get into our study, I wanted to share a story harkening back to a time we all loved called COVID. I feel like the way you connect in the audience is you talk about COVID, right? Let me talk about a greatest era of our life, But early in COVID, there was this interesting development that started happening in my family. My wife and I aren't huge dog people, which maybe, there's probably dog people in here, which is also probably not another way in which you want to try to connect with your audience is talk about the thing that you don't actually like. But my wife and I aren't huge dog people. But somehow our kids love dogs. And during COVID, when you have small children, you had to get out of the house, right? And so we started doing family walks. And so we'd go on walks in our neighborhood. And every time we saw a dog, Chloa, our oldest, she was 2 or 3 at the time, would stop us and say, "Pet it? Pet it?" And so eventually we had befriended some neighbors about a block away because they had 2 dogs. And those dogs' names were Cash and Cora. And so once we started on the walk, it was always like, can we go see if the dogs are out? Can we go see Cash and Cora? And so they would spend like they would have, if they could, have spent just hours petting the dogs through the fence. And Marcus, who was one at the time, would do this like excited scream that was like only for dogs. He was just so excited. And Chloe would feed the dogs sticks, which doesn't make any sense, but she thought they would eat sticks. And she would run back and forth along the fence too, and the dogs would run next to her. So our kids, and now Addie too, has carried on this tradition and passion for dogs. And so for them, it was like anytime we were out and about, and even to this day, if we're out and about and they see a dog, it is, can we pet it? It doesn't matter how much fun they're having, doesn't matter if they're concerned about something else, doesn't matter if they were sad. They stop everything and they ask, can we pet the dog? Can we pet it? And we're about to read a story, not about dogs, but in some ways, Jesus has a similar reaction towards people. That when he sees people in need, when he sees a moment for mission, it doesn't matter the circumstances, he stops and he says, can we, probably doesn't say pet it, but can we engage this person? Can we love this person? Can we do mission? And so what we're going to do this morning is we're going to look at this story, a story of a mission where the situation just seems dire. People are hungry and hangry. And it looks like it's a dead end, but instead Jesus actually sees a moment and a chance to love people well and a moment for mission. And then we're going to share a few Chi Alpha stories. I brought Brandon with me, who's going to share a couple stories as well, to see what does mission look like on our campus. What are the opportunities for mission that we have? And then I'll just invite us to a challenge and to a prayer. So that's the layout of this morning. So if you have a Bible, would you head to Luke chapter 9 with me? It'll also be up on the screen. We'll be in the Gospel of Luke chapter 9, starting in verse 10. For some of us, this may be a familiar story. Verse 10 says, when the apostles returned, they reported to Jesus what they had done. Then he took them with him, and they withdrew by themselves to a town called Bethsaida. But the crowds learned about it and followed him. He welcomed them and spoke to them about the kingdom of God and healed those who needed healing. Late in the afternoon, the 12 came to him and said, send the crowd away so they can go to the surrounding villages and countryside and find food and lodging because we are in a remote place here. He replied, you give them something to eat, which was probably not the answer they were expecting. They answered, we have only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish unless we go and buy food for all this crowd, which as someone on a small missions budget is like, there's no way we could buy food for this massive crowd. We got to send them out. There are about 5,000 men, and scholars say probably 10,000 with women and children that were there. But he said to his disciples, have them sit down in groups of about 50 each. The disciples did so, and everyone sat down. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke them. Then he gave them to the disciples to distribute to the people. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. So let's recap. Jesus and his followers have been doing this missions and ministry thing for a while now, and it was time for a little R&R, a little retreat, a little nap, which as someone that has 3 young kids and works in ministry, man, you don't mess with a good nap. It's the greatest necessity in life. But it says the crowds followed them. And instead of saying no to the crowds, he instead opts for mission. Instead of being grumpy about it, it says that he welcomes them. He tells them the good news of the kingdom, and he heals them. I love that even a tired and fatigued Jesus still makes time for discipleship and missional opportunities. That even in his fatigueness, he's like, we're still going to make time for people. And then he spends all day with them to the point in which they're getting grumpy, most likely, and could use a Snickers bar or a McDonald's drive-thru. And so the disciples see this and very wisely want to help out the thousands of hungry, angry individuals. But the problem is there's only a couple of loaves of bread and a couple fish. And so the disciples see this and they're saying, hey, we got to send everybody out of town. This is like not going to work, right? Send them to the Mickey D's, get them to the Denny's, whatever, because we ain't gonna make it happen here. And again, I've done retreats with hungry students. Like, you don't mess with a hungry crowd, right? So I'm kind of with the disciples on this one. Send them home. But Jesus saw the little bit of bread and the fish, and he saw potential to meet the needs of others. He saw the chance to love by feeding the hungry people. I like to think of it, he saw the chance for missions. He saw the missional potential. All the disciples could see was just the couple pieces of bread and the little bit of fish, the dead end that it looked. But Jesus was able to see beyond that and not only saw the need, but could see a solution. And so what I love is that he saw this couple pieces of breads and fish, and he wasn't intimidated by it. Instead, he says, instead of like, go away, he says, bring it. I just love that. Like, instead of like, go send them away, he says, actually, bring the fish and the bread to me. He wasn't intimidated by the giant hungry crowd and their overwhelming need for food. He didn't see a couple pieces of bread and fish as the means to an end. He saw it as a means to missional love. And he multiplies it. And I love, too, that he doesn't just meet the, okay, their bellies are full. Even the disciples, I wonder that moment, too. They're carrying baskets more than what they brought to him. There's leftovers to go around. Fills their stomachs, includes leftovers. In what may have been a very stressful situation where the need just felt too great and it seemed like the best decision was to run away from the need, instead of fleeing the need, Jesus stopped everything. He pivoted, invited the couple of loaves and fishes, and prepared an overflowing feast. Jesus does not pass up opportunities for mission, no matter how great the need is. Amen? He sees a couple of loaves and fishes and doesn't send them away. He says, bring it. Bring it. Sometimes, even as a Chi Alpha minister, I can look at the needs of a college campus and feel like the disciples and feel like it's just too great. It's too intimidating. All I have is a little bit of bread and fish. What more is there? Those ducks are so far off. Don't even try to save them. Just let them get their degrees, do what they're going to do in college, and we'll try to catch them when they're done. I mean, there's 24,000 students at the University of Oregon. How are we ever going to meet the needs of the masses? But every year, doing disciples who make disciples, I believe more and more that God sees the college campus and he says, bring it. Bring it. He sees college students and sees both need and potential. And that there will be a day, I'm dreaming of a day in which there won't be enough food not just be enough food for everyone, but there will be basketfuls left over. Can you imagine what that would look like? Jesus, make that day come soon. And so that leads me to the question. You may wonder, okay, what are the missional, what's the missional need? And what are the opportunities for mission on our campus? What's the potential that Jesus sees at the University of Oregon and on other college campuses? How does he see it? And so that's what I want to use the next little bit of time and share a few stories, each kind of relating to a few areas of need and potential that if we could reach college students, man, look at Jesus multiply and have basketfuls left over. And so as I share these 4 areas of mission, I want to invite Brandon up. Number 1 is reaching the lost. 2, discipling the Christian. We want to welcome the nations and transform the next generation. And so I want to invite Brandon as he's going to share a story for each of the first 2.
What's up, guys? How's it going? Happy Sunday. My name is Brandon. I'm 26, and I also have the blessing of serving as a missionary and a campus pastor to the University of Oregon. Fun fact, we actually went to the same school up at Western, which is not a sports school, which fit me really well because I grew up not really watching sports. So coming to U of O and just to Oregon in general has been whiplash, let me tell you that. But yesterday we watched the game together, and I feel like I got it. I got my ESPN app. I'm like in it. I'm having anxiety attacks as I'm watching this game. So it's been crazy. I'm excited to share a couple stories of what through Chi Alpha we get to do and participate with Jesus in changing the lives of students all over the world. And so we want to throw up, I think we have a slide up there. Oh my gosh, I'm excited. So this first story is about reaching the lost. So, and it's a pretty recent one. So this last spring, as a way to hopefully connect with new students on our campus who are not in our ministry, who don't know Jesus, my coworker John and I, so John, you can kind of see him in the middle there with the sunglasses in the back and the hat. He's a fun guy. We organized a trip to Florence, which is just an hour away from Eugene, to take some students sandboarding, which I had never done. I also didn't know that we had so many sand dunes in Florence that the guy who wrote Dune actually was inspired by Florence to write that book, which is crazy to me. We had this idea for this trip. We're going to bring in a bunch of students. We're going to meet new people. We're going to have fun. And so what we did was we set up a table right outside the Student Union building, complete with seashells, a beach backdrop. Of course, we were decked out in beach shirts and sunglasses, and we went all out. And as we tabled, I handed out flyer after flyer after flyer to students that went by, just sticking them in their hands. And I probably said sandboarding 100 times till eventually I just ran out of flyers. A few days later, when the time came for our Florence trip, we posted up on campus with a minivan we borrowed from our church and waited for interested students to show up. And one such student was Jasel. He's in the top right here with the arrow. Super nice guy. We'd never met Jasel before. He's from Florida. He comes from a Hindu background. Didn't know anything about Jesus, anything at all. But he just happened to be one of the guys that I stuck a flyer into his hand. I don't even remember doing it, but there he was the day we were going for our trip, just showed up. And he was hyped to go sandboarding. So eventually we had a full van of students, 7 students, and then us 2 on staff, and we headed for the coast. And I was driving. Jasel was right up next to me. And during most of the trip, he was pretty quiet. Again, we had never met this guy. For all he knew, he just got in a van with total strangers. And it's not the most welcoming looking van. So I can respect a little suspicion. And so I made small talk where I could, but eventually he kind of put his headphones in and I think just napped for the trip. I shrugged it off because, like I said, strangers in a van, right? Once we all arrived and started sandboarding, though, Jasel started to open up. I don't know quite like how it happened, but we found ourselves at various times talking about his dating life, girls he was interested in, because he's a freshman in college. This is what's on his mind. How it wasn't or was going well for him. Like, man, I can't read these signs. Like, is she into me? She smiled at me. Just, fun stuff like that. And I'd give him my thoughts, share some of my own dating experiences, and, sprinkle some wisdom of Jesus in there. And by the end of the trip, we were like thick as thieves. Like, buddy. We're already planning to hang out afterwards. I like to go rock climbing on campus, so I invited him to come with me and do that. And I was excited because to me, this trip was a success just by doing this. I met a new student. And so a few days later, we went rock climbing, got dinner on campus, and soon he asked me what every student asked me, Brandon, what are you studying? I'm like, uh-oh, here we go. Well, actually, I'm not a student. I've been graduated for a couple years now, and I didn't even go to this school. And I get the same look every time, like, what? You look like you're in high school? What the heck are you doing on my campus? And so I explained that God had called me to Oregon to share about the gospel, to tell students about Jesus. And he was surprisingly like, wow, that's really dope. Tell me more about that. And so for 2 hours one evening, we were eating and we just laid it all out for him. We talked about all kinds of things. He had so many good questions about why God allowed bad things to happen to people. Turns out the girl he was into wasn't liking him back, and he had some questions for God about that. What it means for God to be a father to us, and all that fun stuff. And this is really significant. Like, Jaisal didn't come to know Jesus and to follow Jesus in that moment, but at our universities, there are thousands of students like him. They don't know Jesus. They'll probably never set foot in a church on their own. They're not going to show up to a campus worship night. And so what do? How do we reach them? The way we reach these lost students is by going to them. We can put ourselves in their path, take interest in what they're interested in, like sandboarding of all things. We can build friendships with them, and in doing so, we build new bridges for the gospel to reach the lost. Because when Jesus sees a mission potential, he says, bring it. Jaisal still has a long way to go, I think, but his heart is open in ways that not a lot of students I've met are. He has so many questions that I'm excited to talk about with him. And he's also acted as a bridge for me to reach other students. The other night we were hanging out. He's like, hey, you should come to Mindfulness Club with me. Like, what the heck is that? And honestly, it's everything parents fear about college. I showed up. There's a room of 40 students. We had a guided meditation. We asked about mindfulness. Students were saying there's no such thing as the self. And I'm like, what is going on here? But through this friendship with this random guy, I'm able to meet new students, share about Jesus in their own space, where I still have to answer why I'm there. But Jesus is able to meet students, and hopefully they can come to know the gospel. Okay, let's go to the next story. This one's actually a personal story. This is a fun photo. This is from a handful of years ago. This is when I was a sophomore in college. I look a little bit different. I was trying out the mustache at the time, a little bit of a goatee. I'm there on the far left. This is me and my small group. This is actually the first Chi Alpha winter retreat I ever went to, or retreat at all, as a junior in college. And so the question is, where was I? This is my first retreat. Where was I for the first, 2+ years of college? And the answer is, I was lost. I was all over the place. Like many young people, I actually grew up in a Christian home. I attended church every Sunday. My parents poured their hearts into nurturing my faith, and they filled my childhood with the teachings of Scripture. Has anybody here seen VeggieTales? A couple people? Oh yeah. I had the CD back when CDs existed. I love VeggieTales. So good. I knew all the major Bible stories. I knew of, Joseph, the fall, King David, Moses. I knew Jesus came to die for me and my sins. I knew the gospel. Yet despite this foundation, when I left for college, my faith felt weak. Suddenly, I found myself in a new city, facing the new pressure of making new friends. You don't know anybody. What would my roommates and my classmates and my teachers think if they find out that I was a Christian? Would I be accepted? In addition to that, without any parental supervision, which was kind of awesome, I was free to spend my time however I wanted and be whoever I wanted to be. It was enticing to me. So young and lacking the community of believers, I chose to set my faith aside and live for myself. Initially, this actually seemed to work out. I met a bunch of cool people. I joined like an exciting friend group, and I'm like, oh my gosh, people like me. They want me around. I even began dating someone who eventually I was practically living with. Again, no supervision. But as time went on, many of my friendships proved to be superficial and kind of fell away. I found myself feeling lonely and confused and actually trapped in a life that was far off the map from the values I was raised with. And unfortunately, this isn't just my story. For countless young Christians, college can be disorienting for their faith, filled with challenges that lead them to sideline Jesus or even abandon him altogether. In fact, studies show that without intervention, nearly 80% of Christian students will leave their faith in college. It's pretty crazy. So what can be done? And how on earth did I end up here? Talking in front of you at a church. So during my sophomore year, while I was working on some collaborative art project, I studied graphic design and I loved to do illustration, and I would post it on Instagram. And I ended up meeting a student who was like, hey man, can you do illustrations for me? And I'm like, yeah, of course. And this awesome guy named Stevie. And Stevie was on top of it. He was there and he knew he was on mission. He invited me to this Christian group on campus called Chi Alpha. And at first I brushed off the invitation because, come on, a college youth group? Like, come on, that sounds lame, sounds superficial. In fact, he gave me a different small group leader's information, and I ignored it for like months. You know, of course, until a girl invited me. And then I'm like, let's go, all about it. I caved in and I attended my first Chi Alpha Christian Fellowship. And what I discovered was a vibrant community of faith unlike anything I had ever experienced. And by the end of my second year in college, I had joined a men's Bible study, the one you see here actually. And I started meeting weekly with my small group leader who helped me grow in my faith and navigate my difficult questions. And so over the next 2 years of being a student until I graduated in Chi Alpha, 3 significant things happened. First, I built on the foundation of faith that my parents had laid, taking my faith to a deeper level than I had ever imagined. And this led me to finally get baptized at the age of 21. I finally had a spirit-filled community around me, real friends and fellow students hungry for Jesus and unafraid to show it. Their support helped me begin living my faith out on campus for the whole world to see. Through the guidance of my Chi Alpha pastors, I was equipped to face the challenges of following Jesus. They helped me understand how I had ended up where I was spiritually, the choices I had made, helped me take the necessary steps in my life to reconnect with the Lord and live in line with his will. Finally, as a senior, I actually started leading my own Chi Alpha small group. I got to disciple students who were just like me. After graduating, I stayed for 2 years as a missionary intern. And now as a full-time campus pastor, I'm on campus every day looking for more Brandons, Christian students who were disoriented, lost, or pulled away by the enticing things that college has to offer. And if my story teaches us anything, it's this. By intentionally discipling our Christian students, we can change the statistics. Through the community and support of ministries like Chi Alpha, we can build on the foundation these young Christians have and equip them to make a profound impact for God's kingdom in the university, the marketplace, and the world. All right, I'm going to let Joey take it now.
Thank you, Brandon. I won't go too deep into the last 2, but just briefly, a few short stories. Welcoming the nations. There was a student in our ministry now named Selah. And Selah's story is fun because it's a partnership not just in Chi Alpha, but also with the local church and even our Assemblies of God World Missionaries. And so Selah actually moved to Salem, Oregon, in her last couple years as an exchange student in high school. And that was her first introduction into anything Christian, as Japan is like less than 1% Christian. And so her host family started taking her to church. And so she began to grow a curiosity of Jesus and openness to the life of faith. And so after she graduated high school and found out that she was coming to the University of Oregon, that church in Salem, which is a church in our network, in the Assemblies of God here in Oregon, connected her with us. And so we just got to continue the discipleship and the care of Selah. And it was just like almost 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, where Selah came to a Chi Alpha retreat, probably like the same one that I think Brandon did as a student. And it was the first time that she had decided to follow Jesus. And a lot of her story and her challenge is coming from a shame, honor culture, not wanting to bring shame to her family by becoming quote unquote religious. And so it was the first time where she had decided, I'm actually going to choose Jesus and be okay with the ramifications of what that might mean in my family. And so just this past year, we baptized her on campus in the rec center, which is just such a fun thing to do. Way warmer than the lake that I got baptized in. And so she is now a student leader in our ministry, making disciples with Karen in the international side of our ministry. And so there's over 1 million international students in the U.S. There's over 90 countries represented on our campus at the University of Oregon. And so we really get to be foreign missionaries without ever leaving our home and still speaking English, which is really fun. And so we really have the opportunity to, as we welcome the nations, to transform not just Oregon, the U.S., but even the world, because she's going to know better how to reach Japan than I will know how to reach Japan. And lastly, we want to transform the next generation. I have been privileged with one of the greatest examples of living missionally post-college. Both my father and mother-in-law, I mentioned I walked into a community that had been making disciples who make disciples now for over 50 years. Well, my father-in-law were a part of the early years of that movement, and their lives were transformed in Chi Alpha. And my mother-in-law, she passed away a handful of years ago. She actually came to faith in Chi Alpha, and my father-in-law came from a pretty dysfunctional family, but in Chi Alpha and getting discipled, caught the vision for giving his whole life to Jesus and making disciples who make disciples. Even gave a year as a Chi Alpha intern, lived in the same ministry house that I lived in years later. And just both of them coming from some like non-Christian, Jesus-loving families, because of their experience in Chi Alpha, changed their trajectory in their family. They raised 3 children that all love Jesus. My mother-in-law it was a powerful moment at her funeral years ago when, I forget who asked the question, but essentially, who of you in this room have been shaped by Shelley's like devotion to Jesus? And you just saw like 75% of the room stand. People in her family coming to know Jesus because what Shelley learned in college, she took with her and ministered to her family. And now, myself and my wife meeting in college, what is, Chi Alpha, the third generation, when they come to the University of Oregon, in the 2030s and 40s, what might their lives look like because of students 50 years ago, 30, 40 years ago, experienced Jesus. And so we're not trying to just make a cool moment on campus, but we really want to see the world change because of the alumni that come through our community. Like, how can we build up the church in Oregon? How can we send missionaries to the marketplace? How can we plant Chi Alphas in the state of Oregon? Those are all the dreams that we have. How can we transform the next generation? How can families be different even because of someone's experience in college? So we want to reach the lost. We want to disciple the Christian, welcome the nations, and transform the next generation. These are the things that Jesus sees at the university campus, and he says, don't send them home. He says, bring it. Bring it to me. I see the need and I see the potential that's there. And so what about for us? What about Lebanon First Assembly? I don't know you very well, but I can tell that you have a growing heart for missions, which just speaks, obviously is near and dear to my heart. As I mentioned before, you faithfully cared for us. I love that you're excited about those that spoke last week. I love getting the chance to share with your youth and just seeing this heart for missions that Jesus has be just a part of the DNA here. And so I just want you to hear like a well done. Good job. Keep it up. And I also just want to invite you, just one question this week of like, what are the loaves and fishes opportunities around you? Like we just as much as like we want support for us to go and do mission, but Jesus said to all of his followers, make disciples of all nations. And really, you don't have to go. Really, that translation should be as you go, make disciples. So where you find yourself this week, what are the opportunities around you that Jesus is inviting you to love well? In your families, in your workplaces. I don't know if students are in here, but in your schools, in your friendships. Where's a moment that maybe looks like a dead end, but Jesus wants to say, hey, I have the potential to multiply this and make a life impact. Let us not grow weary of asking the question, what are the needs around me and how can I be a part of bringing loaves and fishes to Jesus? And as I close, I'm inspired by a story that I heard from a Chi Alpha director in the 90s at the University of Oregon. And I talked with him when I was coming down here, and he said, one thing that stood out to me, he said, Joey, in our first couple of years, we didn't see anything really happen. We didn't see much transformation happen. He said, it wasn't until I did basically what I'm doing here and visiting churches in Oregon and started sharing about the heart and the vision. It wasn't until I got 1,000 people praying that revival started to happen. Like you might not get the privilege and the joy that Brandon and I get to go, well, maybe some of you don't want to go walk on U of O campus. I get that. But we are all called to go be live-in missionaries at the University of Oregon. But that does not mean that what you do and how you spend your time doesn't affect our experience on campus. What would it look like for us to have 1,000 people praying for the University of Oregon? What revival might begin to happen on campus? What kind of basketfuls of leftovers might we see? And so as I close, what I wanted us to do is just take 30 seconds, and I have names of students up here. A lot of them are students that either are in our Chi Alpha community or students that we're reaching out to. So these are names of real-life students that we know. And I just want to invite us to take 30 seconds. And if there's a name that stands out to you, would you, in a sense, like adopt a student just for a moment and pray for them? And even more, if you wanted to take this name and just be praying for them this week, oh man, all the better. We would love that. And so I just want to say thank you for letting Brandon and I come and hang out with you. We'll be hanging out at a table. We have like some prayer cards and things that we just would love to just connect with you, shake your hand, say go Ducks to some of you, and say, save the Ducks for other of you. But thank you for letting us be here. And will we just take 30 seconds to just pray for a student on the screen?
I'm going to have them leave that up on the screen. And what I'd challenge you to do, if you know how or can before you leave today, is come take a picture of it. and add those names onto your prayer list so that you can be praying over them each and every day in your times of prayer. Because prayer is vital. Prayer is so important in what we do. So I want to challenge you to be doing that. And praying for Joey and family and all the team there that continue to work and reach a very hurting generation who need Jesus. As I said earlier, if you have not yet picked up a card or got one, get one on your way out, just as a reminder to be praying, asking God what to do there at the entrance on your way out today. Stop by the table and talk with Joey and those guys there and just spend a few minutes hearing what God is doing. Today, if you've been moved by what's going on, just realize that, one, we support Joey and his family each and every month, but if you would like to do something more for them, there's an opportunity to do a love offering for them today. We do this for each of our missionaries as they come through, just a chance to bless them with something more. You can take an envelope, mark on there Joey under the other category, drop something in there or write a check. You can do it online as well, just under the other category, write Joey. Just a chance to bless them. A little bit of encouragement. How many know that's always nice when you get that gospel handshake, right? A little something that just helps take the grocery bill off a little bit or whatever. Just be a part of that blessing today. Drop those in the box on your way out. I'm going to invite you to stand with me today as we close. I'm just going to close in prayer with you. And once I'm done praying, I'll be here if you need prayer for anything. I'm gonna allow those guys to go out to the table and be there ready for you. Come take a photo of that if you need to get a little closer on your phone so that you have those names and continue to pray. But let's just agree together today as we close this service out. Lord God, we just ask you to do a work in us and realize that there is a lot of people on our campuses, not just U of O, not just OSU, but there's campuses all across this state filled with teenagers, filled with students who are trying to figure out life. And they're looking for it in a lot of the wrong places. And so, God, I pray that we, as we continue to support the work on the campuses that we support, but also, Lord, that you would raise up new leaders as we pray for them, God, that you would raise them up to be on other campuses and to reach the hurting and reach the lost, that they would have an opportunity to know you. So many times my heart hurts knowing how many walk away from you while on college campuses. And so, God, I pray that you would just create divine appointments where you work out a moment for these guys and others to have God moments where they can encounter you in a unique and special way. So just touch these guys, I pray, Lord, and their families and the other ministry students that are working with them. And God, touch us with a compassion and a heart for the lost on campuses. So God, take us from here today. Let us not walk out of here without a transformation moment in our own lives. Let us walk out of here knowing that we need to pray. We need to continue to support. We need to begin to lift these things up and trust you, God, in all ways in what you're doing. So bless us today as we go, my God. Encourage us. Minister to us as we go out and be the light to somebody else in our community. We just pray this, Lord, in your special and precious name. Amen.